right now, somewhere you're not standing in a room you'll never actually walk into or even know exists at this very moment while you're watching this. Your name is coming up in a conversation you'll never actually hear a single word of, not now, not ever. Someone's describing something you did, some way you handled a hard moment, some detail about how you treat people consistently, and they're doing it with a kind of genuine respect you'd probably find surprising, maybe even a little hard to believe if you could somehow listen in on it. You're not there to hear it, and that's exactly the point worth understanding here. Respect that only shows up when you're physically present isn't really respect at all, if we're being honest about it. It's performance, calibrated for an audience. What's happening in these rooms you're not in, where nobody's managing the reaction for your benefit, is the real thing, unfiltered and unprompted. Most people only ever get evidence of how they're perceived in the moments they're actually present for it in real time. A compliment given directly to their face, a thank you offered right in the moment it happens, a reaction they can visibly see play out on someone's expression as it's happening. That's a genuinely narrow slice of the full picture, though, because a huge amount of how people actually feel about you gets expressed specifically in your absence, when there's absolutely nothing to gain from saying something kind about you, no audience to perform generosity for, nobody checking afterward whether the compliment landed the way it was intended. That's the version worth paying close attention to today, because it's the one nobody's carefully managing on your behalf. Think about the last time you found yourself describing someone you genuinely respect and admire to another person who'd never met them before in their life. You probably didn't just list a few flat facts about them off the top of your head. You told a small story, gave real specifics, explained why this particular person mattered to you in a way that went well beyond a simple one-word label like nice or cool. That's exactly what's happening with your name right now, in conversations you're not even part of, in rooms you'll never step into. People aren't just saying you're nice or fine whenever your name happens to come up naturally in one of these conversations. They're actually explaining you in real, genuine detail, the way people only ever bother explaining things they've truly thought about and formed a real, considered opinion on over time. There's a real, meaningful difference between being liked and being genuinely respected by the people around you, and it's worth taking a moment to understand which one you're actually dealing with here, because they're not the same thing at all, even though people often confuse them without realizing it. Being liked is often about being easy to be around, pleasant, low friction, someone who doesn't cause any complications for anyone. Being respected runs quite a bit deeper than that, into something much sturdier and longer lasting. It's built through consistency over time, through how you actually handle real pressure when it shows up, through whether your actions genuinely match your words across enough situations to prove it wasn't a fluke. If people are specifically respecting you, rather than just comfortably tolerating your presence, that respect was earned through something real, something they personally watched you do or deliberately not do, repeatedly, across enough different situations to actually trust the pattern they observed. You don't actually get to control most of the individual moments that built this reputation over time, moments scattered across years and different contexts, and that's genuinely worth sitting with for a second, because it means the respect people hold for you isn't something you could have performed your way into after the fact, even if you genuinely tried to. It was built cumulatively, gradually, in moments you weren't actively trying to manage or curate for anyone's benefit, the way you responded when bad news landed unexpectedly, the way you treated someone who couldn't do a single thing for you in return, no favor to offer, no benefit to provide, the way you showed up on a completely ordinary day when nobody was watching closely enough for it to matter to your image or reputation at the time. Those unmanaged, unguarded moments are exactly what people remember most clearly and repeat to others later, because they're the ones that feel genuinely true rather than staged. There's a specific kind of respect that comes from being someone people genuinely trust with difficult information, hard conversations, or complicated situations that require real discretion and care in how they're handled. If people consistently bring you their real problems and genuine struggles instead of just their curated, presentable highlights, that's not random or a simple coincidence. That's a form of respect people don't always articulate directly out loud, but demonstrate constantly through what they choose to share with you specifically and what they deliberately keep from others. Being someone's go-to person for something real and difficult, rather than just someone they're friendly with on the surface, is one of the clearest, quietest forms of respect there actually is, even though it rarely gets named as such in the moment. Reputation travels considerably faster and further than most people ever realize or expect, especially in circles and communities that overlap even loosely with one another through mutual friends, shared workplaces, or shared spaces. A conversation happening in one room entirely, among people you barely know or have never even met directly, can carry real details about you that actually originated from someone else entirely, weeks or even months earlier, passed along through connections you weren't even aware existed. By the time it finally reaches a brand new person who's never interacted with you at all, it's not really about that single specific interaction anymore. It's about the broader pattern that interaction happened to confirm, one more data point quietly stacked onto a reputation that was already forming, gradually, long before that particular conversation ever even started. You might naturally assume the version of you people describe when you're not around is somehow exaggerated or overly generous, a kinder, more flattering edit than reality genuinely deserves in an honest accounting. Usually, though, it's actually the opposite of that entirely. People tend to undersell the genuinely good things about someone in casual conversation, softening real praise so it doesn't sound like flattery or come across as excessive, downplaying specific details so the whole thing seems more casual and offhand than it actually is underneath. The respect you're not hearing about directly, that's happening entirely without your knowledge, is probably more genuine and far more carefully considered than anything that would ever actually get said directly to your face in the moment. There's something worth understanding clearly about why some people specifically get talked about with real, genuine respect, while others, doing seemingly similar things on the surface, simply don't generate that same reaction from anyone around them at all, no matter how hard they try. It usually comes down entirely to consistency across contexts that don't naturally overlap with each other at all, contexts where nobody's comparing notes. Someone who's kind only when it happens to be convenient for them personally, only around certain people who matter to their image, only when there's something obvious to gain from it in that specific moment, gets noticed and remembered quite differently than someone whose behavior barely shifts at all, depending on who happens to be watching them. If your reputation holds steady across very different rooms, very different groups of people who don't know each other, that steadiness itself is what people are actually respecting, far more than any single isolated act of kindness or competence could ever earn on its own. It's worth acknowledging honestly and directly that you probably won't ever get direct, explicit confirmation of most of this happening around you in real time, the way you might sometimes wish you could. People rarely walk up to you afterward and report back exactly, word for word, what was said about you in a conversation you weren't part of at all, in real time. That's simply not how it typically works in practice. The absence of direct feedback reaching you doesn't mean the respect isn't actually happening somewhere out of sight. It just means you're operating without a visible scoreboard tracking any of it, quietly building a genuine reputation the honest way, through actual consistent behavior over time, rather than through actively managing how information about you circulates or gets shared. This matters because it fundamentally changes how you should think about your own effort going forward, day to day, in the small, ordinary moments that don't feel especially significant while they're actually happening to you. If you've ever genuinely wondered whether showing up consistently on completely ordinary days, when nobody around seems to be paying any real attention, actually matters in the end or adds up to anything meaningful, this is your answer plainly stated. It matters enormously, considerably more than the occasional big, visible gesture that people sometimes mistakenly assume counts for more in the long run than the small stuff ever could. The ordinary days are exactly what's being quietly described in rooms you're not present in, because ordinary days, repeated consistently enough times over months and years, are precisely what actually build a reputation people genuinely trust and remember. You don't need external validation to know this is genuinely happening around you every day, though it's completely natural and understandable to want some real confirmation anyway, some concrete proof beyond just trusting blindly that it's true without evidence. The signs are usually there if you actually look for them specifically and carefully, in the small details you might have otherwise overlooked or dismissed as nothing worth noticing. People introducing you to others with more detail and warmth than a simple name would require. People seeking you out specifically for advice on things that have absolutely nothing to do with your job title or your official role. People mentioning offhand that someone else spoke highly of you, secondhand, in a way that clearly wasn't prompted by anything you did to fish for the compliment or steer the conversation toward yourself. It's worth being honest and realistic that this kind of quiet, unspoken respect doesn't always translate immediately into obvious, visible advantages right away, in the short term or even the medium term. Sometimes it shows up gradually, slowly, over a longer stretch of time, an opportunity that came your way, specifically because someone vouched for you quietly in a room you weren't even in at the time. A second chance extended to you because your reputation preceded you in a way that worked in your favor without you ever fully knowing exactly why or who to thank for it. Respect that gets built this way, cumulatively and honestly, tends to compound slowly over years, showing up in moments you won't always be able to trace directly back to any one specific conversation or person, even though the connection is genuinely there underneath the surface. None of this should ever become something you actively perform for going forward, chasing it deliberately on purpose once you know it exists and can name it clearly. The moment respect becomes a goal you're actively pursuing and strategizing around, rather than a natural byproduct of how you genuinely already treat people without thinking twice about it, it starts shifting into something else entirely, something more calculated, more self-conscious, and noticeably less genuine to the people around you who are watching closely, whether you realize they're watching or not. The version of you that earned this respect in the first place wasn't trying to earn anything specific at all in that moment. It was simply being consistent, honest, and decent in situations that didn't actually require any of those qualities from you, situations where cutting corners would have been easy and likely gone unnoticed entirely. That's the version worth protecting carefully going forward, not replacing with a more strategic, self-aware version, now that you know people are watching and talking more than you previously realized. There's also something worth saying about how this respect interacts with your own self-perception, which often lags well behind reality in situations exactly like this one. A lot of people carry a version of themselves around in their own head that's years out of date, still shaped by an old insecurity from a difficult season of their life, an old mistake they haven't fully let go of yet, an old version of who they used to be before they gradually grew into who they actually are now, today, in this exact moment. Meanwhile, the people around them have been quietly updating their assessment the entire time, watching the growth happen in real time even when the person themselves couldn't see it happening from the inside. The gap between how you privately see yourself and how you're actually perceived by people who genuinely know you well is often much wider than you'd ever guess on your own, and it usually runs entirely in your favor rather than against you. It's also worth remembering that respect earned this way, quietly and cumulatively over a long stretch of time, tends to be far more resilient and durable than respect built through visible achievement alone, the kind that shows up on a resume or a highlight reel. Achievements can always be questioned, compared unfavorably to someone else's, or eventually surpassed entirely by someone who comes along later and does it bigger or better. character, demonstrated consistently over time across situations nobody was ever grading you on or keeping score of, is much harder to dismiss or argue away because it was never built to be measured against anyone else's version of it in the first place. It simply is what it is, observed repeatedly and independently by different people who had no particular reason to lie about what they personally witnessed. There's a quiet, steady kind of security that comes from understanding this fully once it actually sinks in and settles somewhere deeper than just an interesting idea you happened to hear once and then forgot. You're not dependent entirely on winning people over one interaction at a time, constantly starting over from zero with every single new person you happen to meet along the way. There's already a foundation firmly in place, built patiently over years of ordinary, unglamorous behavior that nobody was ever applauding you for at the time, and that foundation is doing quiet work on your behalf in places you'll never personally witness, in conversations you'll never actually be part of, long after any single individual interaction has been completely forgotten by everyone involved in it. There's one more thing worth naming before we close this out, and it's this. The people who talk about you with genuine respect when you're not around are rarely the loudest people in your life, the ones constantly complimenting you to your face at every opportunity. Often they're the quieter ones instead, the ones who don't need to perform their opinion of you out loud because they've already formed it privately, thoroughly, and don't feel any particular need to announce it every time your name comes up. Pay attention to who consistently shows up for you without being asked, who consistently follows through on what they say they'll do, who consistently treats you the same way whether or not anyone else happens to be watching that particular interaction unfold. That consistency, more than any single compliment ever could, is usually where the deepest, most genuine respect actually lives, quietly, without needing to be spoken out loud very often at all, if ever. It's also worth genuinely considering how you might extend this same quiet respect to other people in your own life, the ones who probably have absolutely no idea what you actually say about them privately, warmly, when they're not around to hear any of it. If this video has made you think differently about your own reputation and how it moves through rooms you don't control, it's worth taking a moment right now to think about whose reputation you might be quietly building at this very moment, in conversations they'll never hear either, without you ever telling them directly. Respect, given honestly and without an audience present to witness it, tends to circulate in both directions eventually, even if neither person involved ever manages to trace it back to exactly where or when it started.